Welcome to Ouch. Was that a ghost? This podcast may contain graphic material, which some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised.
Help me.
Now that we covered that, here's your host, Liz.
Welcome back to Ouch, Was That a Ghost? Before I start today's episode, I just want to tell you guys about a podcast, Michael and Jeremy Steal Your Podcast. If you want a good laugh, I definitely suggest checking it out. So they actually came over and stole my podcast. All I can tell you is that I disrespected RoboCop and Christopher Walken's Ghost of a Vampire wanted shrimp. It was a blast. I have no idea what they did in the middle of it, and I can't wait to hear it. And I want to thank you guys so much for your support. You've all been fantastic as I've still been trying to figure out what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And you guys are just amazing. I have no idea why you listen to me, but I appreciate it. So for today's case, I'm covering a listener request, The Benders. This takes place in the Kansas frontier long before Dorothy and Toto lived there. It was just a really highly tumultuous place. It's early America, Kansas, and there was so much tension in the area. There were disputes going on about everything, slavery being a big one. There was a lot of people that were pro and anti. This was around the time of the westward expansion. Settlers were taking over indigenous people's land. The government was forcibly taking over all of the Osage tribe's land and pushing them to a reservation in Oklahoma. That's a whole nother story. This was around the time of the Homestead Act, which you could partake in. If you had $18, you could claim 160 acres of land. That's huge to start a homestead. To participate, you had to make a long journey and survive that. Hopefully find land to claim and not get killed trying to claim it because human greed was rampant back then, as always. And you had to thrive on the land for 5 years and boom, the land is yours. But remember, there's no U-Hauls or Home Depots and the land wasn't farm ready. Not all the plots had great soil. So the reward was great, but it didn't come easy. And this was essentially the Wild West. There were cowboys, outlaws, there were settlers, homesteaders, people there to land grab. In October 1870, one family decided to start their own homestead, the Benders, who were 4 people who claimed to be a family. The assumed German immigrant family consisted of John Bender, who spoke very little English, and when he spoke, it was described as very guttural. He was about 58 years old. He was about 5'8", 5'9". He was described as sparsely built with no whiskers. The descriptions in the newspapers kill me. His wife was named Elvira or Elmira. She spoke broken English. She was about 48 years old, and she was described as having blue eyes and brown hair. And she was said to be rather heavyset. Her neighbors called her she-devil, so I'll let you imagine her demeanor. The son was John Jr. He was about 25 years old. He spoke English, but he had a really strong German accent. He, like his father, was 5'8" or 5'9". He had gray eyes and brown hair. He was described as slightly built with a light mustache and, of course, no whiskers. I don't know why we don't bring that back, no whiskers. That's fantastic. So we know he's not a cat. And he was nicknamed Halfwit as he was known to just laugh at nothing for no reason at all. And then there was the daughter, Kate, not Catherine. She spoke English with a very slight German accent. She was about 22 years old with dark hair and eyes. She was described as very good looking. The newspaper described her as well-formed and rather bold in appearance. The actual relationship of the Bender children was suspicious to the neighbors. They thought that John Jr. and Kate were just a little bit too affectionate to be siblings. And the neighbors thought maybe they were actually married or at least in a relationship. I don't know, maybe they were siblings. What do I know? The Benders settled into a 160-acre plot of land in Labette County, Kansas. On that plot of land, the family moved into a one-room log cabin. This was located on the Osage Mission Independence Trail. This trail was the only clear path to travel further west. They had a barn with a corral and a well installed alongside their one-room cabin. The Bender woman started a 2-acre garden for produce, and they planted an apple orchard, but they needed to make money. So what the family did was the family separated the cabin by hanging a canvas cover for a wagon in the center, using the back of the cabin as an inn for weary travelers. Well, I guess just one because the room only had one bed. And the front of the cabin had a table and chair that were set up so people could stop in and grab a hot meal or a drink. And the front was also made into a general store. The store sign read grocery, but GROCRY, so Grow Cry. Kate, who was known to be very charming, she advertised herself, not the inn herself. She sent out flyers and put advertisements in the newspaper about her abilities. She was a self-proclaimed psychic, medium, healer, and according to one of her advertisements in the newspaper, quote, Professor Miss Katie Bender can heal all sorts of diseases, can cure blindness, fits, deafness, and all such diseases. Also deaf and dumbness. She also offered lectures. She did it all. There were a few other spiritual families in the area, and the area was surprisingly accepting of it for the time period. The Bender cabin was about 2 hours southeast of Wichita, Kansas, right on the Osage Trail. So travelers could stop by for supplies or have a bite to eat. Kate being the beautiful face that welcomed them into their home store inn. In May 1871, the body of a man named Jones was found in Drum Creek with a fractured skull and a slit throat. The owner of the creek was under suspicion, but nothing really came of it. In February 1872, 2 more men's bodies were found. They also had fractured skulls and slit throats. We're now in 1873, and the community started taking notice of the high numbers of missing travelers, on top of the recent murders, one being George Lochner, who was traveling with his young daughter, 1-year-old Mary Ann, to visit some family in Iowa, and they never arrived, and they were never heard from again. Another missing person was a prominent doctor, William York, who was reported missing by his brother. His brother reported him missing, but he also, along with about 50 others, started asking around and searching for his brother, just trying to retrace his trail. I mean, some people didn't survive some of the trips or would meet up with robbers, cowboys, whatever. Something could happen, but this was just higher than what was normal. And it took a few years for the community to notice the high numbers because, noticing travelers disappearing wasn't that easy. It's not like today where you could call and check in. It was, if you were traveling across country, you'd just wait and you'd probably give it an extra week because something could have happened along the way and you wouldn't know. So the missing travelers, on top of the string of murders that all seemed to be done in the same way, was just kind of odd. The word spread of all these happening, so people were just kind of avoiding that route, but the town, trying to get to the bottom of this, had a town meeting at a nearby schoolhouse. There was about 75 people in attendance. They were there to try to figure out what was going on. It was a tension-filled meeting as everyone was on edge. At the meeting, Dr. William York's disappearance was brought up by his brother, and like I said, his brother was kind of investigating where his brother went. Did you see him here? Did you see him here? And he kind of pieced it together that he did travel down that trail. And some people mentioned that he may have stopped at the Benders Inn. The male Benders who happened to be at the meeting were asked, did he stay there? And the Benders said, yes, he stayed, but not for long. And the Benders reminded everyone that this is a dangerous area. Maybe cowboys got him. Either way, the town meeting ended with warrants issued for all the residents in the area to be searched. 4 days after the meeting, one of the Benders' neighbors, Billy Toll, grew concerned when he noticed at the Benders' farm some of the animals looked like they were not being cared for. They had no food, no water. They were just looking pretty sickly. So he went over to be what's going on, talk to the Benders. And when he went to the front door, he kind of peeked in, saw that the cabin was vacant. So he went and grabbed some more men to go and check the cabin out. Concerned, they went into the cabin or the inn. And when they opened the door, a terrible noxious odor just hit them in the face. Continuing into the house, in the kitchen area, they saw a trap door in the floor, which was covered in blood. They also saw that the cabin was pretty much cleaned out. There was no food, no clothes, nothing in there. While searching the house, they did find 3 hammers in there and a knife that still had blood on it, on the serrated part. They actually picked up the cabin to search underneath it, which I thought was really funny. But as the property was investigated further, they noticed that there was some freshly moved soil in the garden area. They prodded this with a metal pole and they kind of felt something, so they dug up one little section, and there they found the body of Dr. York with his skull bashed in and his throat slit. That's when the rest of the garden was dug up, and about 9 more bodies were found. They also found body parts that did not match any of the corpses. And this is probably the worst thing I'm going to tell you in this story, so if you don't want to hear it, skip ahead about 30 seconds. One of the bodies that was found was that of the missing man that I mentioned earlier, George Lochner, He, like the doctor, had his skull bashed in and his throat slit. If you recall, he was traveling with his 1-year-old daughter, Marianne. Her body was found with his. She had no markings on her body, so it's assumed that she may have been buried alive with her father's corpse. A body was also found in the well on the property, so they were drinking and serving water from the well. The town flooded the Bender property, as well as people from other states. They were just flocking there from as far as Chicago, New York. They even had to have special trains come in just to bring people. On one of the special trains, there were 7 cars filled with people that they dropped off. It's said that over 3,000 people were said to be on the Benders' property. The concern for the family quickly turned into a vigilante hunt as they pieced together the misdeeds of the family. The family's welcoming stop was actually the final destination for an unknown number of victims. The police pieced together what the family had been using the inn for. The inn being a small cabin, like I said earlier, the Benders separated the room by hanging that wagon canvas cover to separate the kitchen from the sleeping quarters on the other side of the room. This canvas acting as like a false wall. And the Benders played this really nice innkeeper role. They were very accommodating to their guests. The guest of honor would get a special seat at the table with their back to the curtain, and usually Kate would charm them or show them her abilities, just somehow distract them to keep focus on her. While the guest of honor was busy with Kate, another family member would sneak up behind the curtain, usually the father or son, and would hit the guest, striking them over the head with a hammer. Under the seat was a trap door that would drop the guest into the basement. When in the basement, the guest would be stripped of any valuables or cash the family would take, and then they would finish the guest off by slitting their throats. Under the cover of darkness, they would then bury the corpse in the backyard garden. I assume also dispose elsewhere, just because of the body parts. The property was said to have had at least 11 corpses that they found, plus the unidentified body parts, but there were still a lot more missing people in the area, so it's assumed that there were more victims. The property was referred to as Hell's Half Acre. Between Dr. York's brother, who donated $1,000, and Governor Thomas Osborne, they managed to get together a $2,000 bounty, dead or alive, or $500 apiece, which was set for the Benders, who no one was even sure if they were actually related. Some say Kate and the mother were, some say none were. The family, probably sensing their misdeeds were about to be discovered at the town hall meeting, seemingly disappeared. And no one had their real names, so maybe a lynch mob caught up with them, or maybe they just managed to escape the area and live their lives under assumed names. You have to remember the time period. This wasn't a time where you could check surveillance cameras or ping cell phones. People could easily disappear. You couldn't track their credit cards. There have been many leads over the years, but none really went anywhere. In 1873, the Emporia News claimed to know the identity of John Sr. as William Bender, but again, went nowhere. In 1892, 2 women from Michigan were brought in who were thought to be the Bender mother and daughter. The women that were brought in were Elvira Hill and daughter Sarah Davis, but they were ultimately released and found not to be the Bender women. The infamous serial killer family story has been told for years. In Kansas, there's actually a marker which tells the Bender family story, which is a little strange to me, but what do I know? In 1961, a museum was actually built for the Bender family, the Bender Museum. They claim to have had the hammers donated to them by a family member, and they tried to kind of recreate what the Bender Inn looked like, but ultimately it closed down and all the items were sent to another museum. The Bender house was destroyed and the victim amount varies, but some articles claim that there was 11, some say 20, with many victims left unfound and unnamed. Maybe that's why the supernatural activity where the house once stood is said to be very active. But yeah, it's not that long. That's the story of the Bloody Benders. This was the first family, ? Of serial killers in the United States. I'll steal the last sentence of the historical marker that was erected. Their story is unresolved and remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the Old West. I would love to hear what you guys think. Do you think that they got away? Do you think that they were a family? Swing by any social media and leave me your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. And if you have any requests for stories, leave them there too. I would love to hear those as well. Again, thank you everybody so much for listening. Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you need more content or just want to help support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com and search Ouch, Was That a Ghost? If you need some snazzy merch, you can find it at crowdmade.com by searching Ouch, Was That a Ghost? If you have a story you'd like to share, you can email it to ouchwasthataghost@yahoo.com. You can also find us on Facebook and all the other social media platforms under Ouch, Was That a Ghost?
Help me.
All links can also be found on ouchwasthataghost.com.